on Native American issues, right? Indigenous people,
Yes.
because we it's a conversation that the country just never has, right? We don't teach in school, as the title implies. And today I'm joined by Kelci. How you doing, Kelci?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Let me get the feed switching ready. Um, to my listeners, what explain like you know you're Native American, right?
Yes, I am.
And you sort of have like a personal stake in this issue, right?
For the most part, I'd say, if not me, definitely my family and everything who are still living on reservations and everything, as well as friends who live on other reservations, et cetera, et cetera.
And you're from Montana, and I know that we went to school together, but like Montana is chock full of reservations. We have all kinds of
Yep.
yeah, we have a whole bunch of them, right? Even though there's a lot of them, they're a very small part of our like land base. But I bet you know someone, not you, Kelsey, but the listeners, you know someone on a reservation. So can you like explain like that dynamic between the reservation and the not the reservation?
Well, the reservation and everything is kind of like walking onto a different part of the world and everything, I'd probably say. I know that you'll see on like, TV and the news and everything like that and the things that they see on, I guess, lack of a better term and everything, the hood and like the poverty areas and everything like that. But this is, I would say, in certain areas and everything more to the extreme. They're very underfunded and everything, very unjustified in different areas and whatnot. So I'd probably say it's a harder way of living when you live on the reservation.
Yeah, one of the things in Montana is our reservations are very underfunded, right? And you can kind of tell, like again, they're sort of impoverished areas compared to the rest. Now they're not terrible, but like you know, there's a
No,
very bad
definitely not
representation.
terrible and everything. You'll see 10 times the culture and everything in regards and everything of Native American culture on reservations than you would typically anywhere else, as
Well,
expected.
what's wild is we don't really have in Montana. We don't really have any hoods, right? We don't have any big cities. We have
No,
reservations, and those are kind
we're
of
in the
like
mountains.
yeah, they're our most impoverished areas, but they're not that bad. So when you go over to like places like Florida, right? Some of those tribes they have like really nice uh, reservations, and they also have like in addition to the treaty money that some might receive, the reservation themselves make so much money they give the occupants. I don't know how to explain that, but an additional funds, right? Like some of these Native American places are extremely wealthy, but that doesn't seem to stop like injustice. It doesn't seem to stop like people going missing. It doesn't seem to stop like the government's overreach, those kind of things, right? So it's sort of explain like what are we missing in the mainstream media? What is not covered?
You know what? I'd probably say just about everything. You know, uh, Speaking from somebody and everything more millennial than anything, you look on movies, you look on the news and everything, and it's kind of covering mostly city areas, and it's only the local news and everything that would probably cover, these reservation areas and everything or more low income areas. So not a lot of people and everything aware. Like you don't see this on social media. You don't see this on like, YouTube or videos and everything that'll, catch people's attention and everything. It's not something you can easily put a dollar sign on, therefore it's not sellable. When you think Native American and everything like that, you think of like the half-ass versions that you probably learned at school. You probably heard of, Pocahontas. You've probably heard of like, cowboys and Indians and stuff like that, but you don't know about like a lot of the harsher details of Native American life and everything and the injustices that have affected us generation upon generation upon generation. And that was on purpose,
Yeah,
which is
that
actually
was
some of the things I'm
definitely
going to be covering too. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. So for my listeners, right? Like I'm not Native American, and I know relatively very little about it. But like an example, of what we're kind of go over today is in like the 1920s, I believe Tulsa was a downtown area. It was very successful, like Black Wall Street they called it, and the U.S. government bombed it. Right, the U.S. government like actually bombed it with like bombs, and they burned it down and they killed a bunch of people, and it was for like racist reasons, right? And like That's a huge event. It was a mass massacre, massive murdering, and they don't teach that in school. That was, you never go over that. Most of my friends, when I mention that, they're like, "What do you mean?" And then you Google it, and they're like, "Oh wow, I had no idea the government did this." That's a small event, obviously.
That's
The
on
national,
purpose.
yeah, that's on purpose, right? They don't want to teach you that for some reason. Why is that not in the curriculum? Who knows, right? But that it's even worse when you look at Native American issues, right? We all do know about like um, some of the injustices, right? But like when the Pilgrims came here, the colonizers came here, the Thanksgiving wasn't a good thing. Like we make it like it's, oh
Absolutely
man, yeah,
not. It's
oh
not
yeah,
even a lot of Native Americans today and everything, and I'm sure this is probably heard in other areas, if not practiced in other areas and everything. They don't even bother dealing with Thanksgiving and everything. That's just a really harsh and odd reminder and everything that has just been kind of blown up.
one of the
But
biggest issues I want to go over is like missing indigenous people, right? For some reason,
yes,
we just don't do a good job finding them, stopping the kidnappings or the murders or whatever caused these people to go missing. Like, what can we do, or what is the U.S. government or what is the U.S. population missing when it comes
you know, I can't really say really on that and everything. But in my personal opinion and everything, care more. Treat people and everything how you would treat your neighbor or your relative or your child. If your child were to go missing, if your sister were to go missing, which it seems like it's more indigenous women and everything who are coming up missing and everything. And I know that there's this big thing on sex slavery that's been going about and everything like that, but it just doesn't seem like, oh, that's another Native American woman or Indian woman and everything that came up missing. Well, they're a dime a dozen. Who cares? And it's terrible because the whole thing surrounding racial indifferences and everything shouldn't be an issue. I think everybody should know that it shouldn't be an issue, but it still is, regardless of what we do or what we try, it seems.
to that? I have a question for you, Kelsey.
Okay?
I know like the reservations, they follow like different rules, right? They're essentially a different kind of state government, right? They follow federal rules, but they don't have to follow all state laws, right? I remember in Washington
Right.
State when I was there, marijuana was legal, right? But it was not legal on the reservation, right? And so you can still get in trouble for that. What is that a good thing? You think? Is it good that I have autonomy like this? And you know, should we have more unified rules, or is it okay that they're sort of more autonomous?
I absolutely believe that there should be more unity when it comes to like the laws and everything as part of the reservation and everything and the government. I realize that the the different roles and everything were set in place and everything because the government specifically wanted these Native Americans in these small rural areas to be able to be like, okay, here's your little bit of land and everything. Here you can do whatever the hell you want with it, and this is what do whatever. But the problem with that, and a lot of people and everything don't know or really aware of or don't always speak on and everything, you'll have, you know, white men or white people or, whoever who are able to go onto the reservation and do whatever they want. They could be raping women, they could be killing people and everything like that, and then they step off the reservation and 9 times out of 10 they don't get touched. You'll have reservations and everything who aren't able to do anything about it. In fact, there are Native Americans and everything on Native American land that due to, underfunded, justice systems and everything like that, you could probably murder somebody in your backyard and only be in prison and everything for 2 years max, because that's all they can really afford for it. And then you're right back out. You could do injustices and everything anywhere else. Say Native American is off land and everything and gets caught up with some legal drama and everything and is able to run to the reservation and they can't be touched. You know, it's
Yeah,
there's a lot of
that's
injustices and everything going to it.
it's just so strange, right? That for those that know, like they have their own rules. Right? There's tribal law, there's tribal officers, there's tribal court. There's a whole different system, and like she said, there's loopholes and there's gaps, right? Where people are able to escape persecution, or sorry, prosecution, not persecution, prosecution, because they're able to get these, use these loopholes, right? And so
Right.
it's a crazy dynamic, and it's allowed for like severe injustices, right? You see people exploit that a lot, right? Um, one thing I also wanted to go over was sort of like the reservations themselves, right? Like they were obviously when the country was like founded, most of the land was like Native American, right? A lot of the land was. They got smaller, 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 smaller,
Hmm.
right? And now today we have like I would imagine less than 2% of the land in the United States is Native American land. I don't know the number, guys. If someone wants to fact check me on that, I don't know, but it's pretty
Fact check.
yeah, fact check. Yeah, it's pretty small amount though. So like, how did we get to where we are now? And like, is that fair?
Oh, no, it's not fair in any ways. I think one of the things that I want to be able to cover and everything that absolutely nobody talks about is the injustices and everything that purely surrounded the Native Americans and everything in general that was completely taken out of the history books and everything that, okay, let's talk about the boarding schools. That's one big thing. I feel that everybody knows about Columbus coming over the seas and, everything that happened with that, why, the Trail of Tears, why, the reservations and everything like that. But nobody talks about the boarding schools. Nobody, really brings it up and everything. And really the only people who are aware really hang on to it and everything are the people who suffered from it. And you're talking about generations and generations and generations of Native American people that have dealt with a lot of trauma, due to it. Um, well, it all started with an experiment created by Richard Henry Pratt. He had a charge of prisoners of war and everything, and he taught these men English, how to read, how to write, how to dress. He dressed them up in military uniforms, and it was basically an assimilation experiment. And he took his results to the federal government, and which basically providing the fact and everything that we could civilize these people. Like, we don't have to kill them off. Like, they come in numbers and everything like that. We can't have control over it, so if you can't beat them, join them. But to the white man standard. So he takes this to the federal government and everything, and they see that these Native American people and everything are capable of assimilation. So they fund his project, creating the first Native American boarding school, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. And the thing about Richard Henry Pratt is that he had this all-time motto that's kill the Indian, save the man. And this has echoed through the ears of so many people and everything through so many years, which is incredibly wrong. It's nothing short of genocide that's disguised as American education, you know?
Yeah, this is literally super dark, right?
Oh, extremely dark. That's just the start.
For the listeners, like yeah, this is a pretty dark. So it gets dark, right? So
Oh,
bear
yeah.
with us if that's the case. One thing I wanted to sort of elaborate on that was like I remember reading a book in high school, I believe, about that, right? About like a Native American who was uh, quote unquote assimilated, right, through a boarding school, and he ended up becoming a rodeo star. I don't know the book. You guys can quote me on that, but there was a lot of death. Like a lot of Native Americans didn't survive this process, right? They would cut their hair. They would change their language. You weren't allowed to speak your previous languages, right? You weren't allowed to see people from, from your tribe, whatever. Like it was a complete, like, human rights violation, right? Like, does
Oh,
that
yeah,
sound pretty accurate?
there's I mean, I looked into it and everything. There's actually a handful of, like, different video or movies and everything, and even a TV show and everything, I believe. I can't think of the name of it right now, but there also is a movie on Netflix and everything right now called Crazy Horse that covers a little bit and everything on the assimilation project of boarding schools. And there was,
So
in the end and everything, about 150 boarding schools and everything made, over the U.S., and not even just the U.S. The same tactics were used in New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. And all these countries acknowledged and reconciled and apologized in some way, except for the U.S.
let's go with that actually. 'Cause that's a better point than what I was going to mention. In the USA, we are just incredibly unapologetic. Right? Like, are we racist? I don't know if we're racist right now. Currently, maybe a little bit in ways, but we're nowhere near as racist as we were. But that doesn't mean that
No,
like
not at all.
we can't recognize our past and like reconcile that, right? I'm not talking about reparations per se. For those who don't know, reparations are like the government pays the people that were discriminated against in the past or that were had to suffer because of the government in the past, right? I'm not talking about that.
I believe a
I'm
lot
not
of
talking
those
about
payouts and everything were more so made in Canada too, because I think the movement and everything that was made in Canada, they kind of like really went for it gung ho, and they were the ones who, from what I know now, there it could be New Zealand and Australia and everything too. I do believe Australia and everything right now is in in the movement and everything, but from the research and everything I've done, there has been payouts to um, people and everything who've had to deal with it in Canada. But reading more into what happened at the boarding schools, like you were saying, I don't know what rodeo movie you were talking about and everything. I'll look into that. But it still covers the same thing. At these boarding schools and everything that were made or, well, created through Richard Henry Pratt and everything, assimilating Native Americans and everything, try to be able to put them on your side, to be able to look a little as to why it's so serious is the fact that you had 100,000 children taken from their families. Now, that's 100,000 just children because they felt as though the adults and everything were a lost cause. You can't teach an old dog new tricks and everything, so what do? You take their children. So you had 100,000 different Native American children taken from different tribes and everything all over the U.S. and put into these schools. They were from the ages of anywhere between newborn 6 months and everything on up to like even 6-year-olds or whatever they were able to get a hold of. Now, the issue is that these children don't know anything except for what they've been taught. And if anything, they're children. They don't know anything at all. They just know what their parents taught them, their surroundings and things like that. You think about how important it is and everything is how we treat our kids today and everything and how their minds are sponges and, how delicate and everything it is to be able to treat them and everything because what they learn from birth on to 10 years old is what molds them, what makes them. So they're going to these schools, they're being kidnapped because the government at this moment and everything doesn't give two shits on how they get the children, just as long as they get them. So they get these children and everything, they take their cultural clothes and everything away from them and dress them up in the military uniforms. They cut their hair off and everything, and to those and everything who don't know, for a Native American and everything, cutting your hair is a sign of mourning. So they're getting taken from their families, getting their clothes taken away, getting their hair cut off and everything, and they're thinking, like, who died? What is happening? What is going on? So they get thrown into these schools and everything, and they'll be learning, the American version of education and everything in the morning, and in the evening time and everything, they're doing trade schooling. Now, these trade schoolings and everything like that is basically what's paying for the trade schools. So it's free slave labor from children who have no business doing these industrial activities and everything whatsoever, but still forced to. Now, not only is this free slave labor and everything in of the most grueling manner, but they are physically beaten, they are sexually abused, they are just pretty much abused in every manner and everything there is possible, even mentally and emotionally and everything, having them think that their very existence and everything is not right. They're looking at the white man's standard as a standard of success, and anything less than that is not acceptable. And these are children who are severely taken advantage of. You'll have parents who are camping outside of these schools and everything just for a chance to be able to see their kids. There are parents and everything who are fighting to be able to get their kids back. Now, this is what's interesting, is the fact that the government and everything made sure that they had control over the situation because they starved these families. These families and everything weren't getting food without the government's help. So the government's sitting here saying, like, okay, without giving us your children, you're looking at going to prison or starving because we're not giving you any food if you're not giving us your children. So obviously any parent out there knows that you're going to fight for your kid, but it's hard to fight against an army.
It's literally, this is literally like super dark. I want to reiterate that again because like
Yeah.
it can be almost depressing to learn of these things, right? Like the government, like literally, like you said, they controlled the entire situation, right? They were like, you can't bite the hand that feeds you in a sense. So they couldn't, people couldn't do anything about it, right? What do you do about
Right.
this when the government, you rely on the government because they've made you rely on the government, right? So this is just, it's a horrible situation. What, how long, like, let's go back in time a little bit. Even before that, right? Like, obviously, pilgrims get here, they start to colonize, they go farther, 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 right? They
I think where you're, I think I know where you're going with that.
well,
Since the 1600s and everything, Europeans have tried to assimilate Native Americans and everything and civilize us and pass laws, between the 1600s to the 1800s when the Americas and everything were finally established as the Americas. Now, we're talking about 1800s through the 1950s. These continuing policies and everything even affect us today. Let's be real. One interesting fact and everything that pretty much blew my mind. You think about, harsh realities and everything within the world, one of which and everything has to do with Hitler and the Jews, like that's deep. We're talking about, the camps and everything that they were in, how they were brutalized, how the genocide and everything came about. But what's interesting is that within Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, which there's a volume 1 and a volume 2. The volume 1 was made in 1925 and the volume 2 was made in 1926. And is basically stating how Hitler studied how the people of America treated the Native Americans. So, in other words and everything, he genuinely got his ideas from the Americas on on the genocide and everything against the Native Americans. That blew my mind.
That is
right?
wild. I did not know that. Holy cow. That is wild. What I did know was apartheid. For those who don't know, apartheid was in South Africa. It was basically like slavery, segregation, slash, Jim Crow. What they did down there was the same thing. They looked at models around the world, and they particularly looked at America, like how effective we were at segregating black people and our slavery system, right? And they took the best, I wouldn't call it best, obviously, I'm not advocating that, but like the most effective elements of that, and other parts of the world that had slavery and segregation, and they put them all into one little basket, and they passed it. It's called apartheid. But that's crazy that Hitler, who was a very
Yeah, Hitler, the most popular bad guy straight from hell, yeah.
yeah, and they took from him.
And the Americas were the inspiration. Like, that's sick.
That's wild, man. Like I did not know that, kids. Like this is not something. Again, they don't teach you this stuff in school, right? And why don't they teach you this in school? To me, it's because
Oh, that was intentional. That was very much intentional.
yeah, it paints an unfair light of the United States according to the view of the colonizer, right? And I'm not here to say like white people are racist. That's not the crux of this
White people
argument.
today. Well,
Yeah,
most white people today.
yeah, most. Yeah, we're literally not saying anyone specifically is racist. Like I don't want anyone to feel attacked because we're talking about these kind of things, but we have to at some point reconcile like what happened in the past with Native Americans, with Black people, Asian people in internment camps. Like as a country, we don't do a good job of that. We're so short-sighted. People often argue no one alive today has ever owned a slave, so therefore slavery has no impact. No, the impact of slavery still reaches us today. We still have ghettos because of redlining and Jim Crow laws. The reservations are the way they are because of the treatment of Native Americans in the past. It's not a new thing, right? So
Right.
we as a country have to reconcile this. And my question to you would be like, how do we do that? What do we do going forward to like make
Well,
this stuff more knowledgeable to people?
I think before going forward and everything, we really need to be able to acknowledge the past and what has been done. Because ironically enough and everything, I ended up having a conversation with some friends and everything here yesterday, actually, who are white, who do have their opinions and everything on the situation, because we're talking about the big extreme of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything, and it kind of like solely, oh, sorry, I have a call coming in. And it solely, going against white people and everything because there's just so much rage. There was just so much, done wrong and everything. But without knowing the past and everything, it's hard to really know where to build from the future. When you want to talk about the 150 boarding schools and everything within the U.S., with all these children and everything and all these wrongdoings and everything, I think one thing to mention and everything, you're talking about, on the news and everything, they're trying to go against, child sex slavery and everything like that, which is basically what some of these boarding schools and everything were. It went from military-based schools and everything and then handed over to the Catholic Church. And that's a whole bigger issue and everything. But once it got to the Catholic Church and everything, that's pretty much where it got worse. Now, the thing about these boarding schools and everything is that these were not brought to light until 1928. It's 2020 right now, and it didn't get brought to light until 1928. So within that time and everything like that, as we're doing today and everything with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything like that, there was an American Indian movement. Now, this American Indian movement and everything, also known as AIM, rose the civil rights movement and everything, between the 1920s and everything in the 1960s, and forced more schools and everything to shut down. The government then handed control over to the remaining schools to tribes to be run in partnership with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But this era of boarding schools and everything, as it was fading, another assimilation project was taking shape, and that was adoption. So, you're shutting down these schools and everything because it's come to light about everything that's going wrong and how, they're treating these Native American children and everything and how it's affecting them and how cruel it is. So they're shutting down the schools and everything. But the thing is that adoption was actually cheaper than the boarding schools. So, of course, the federal government is going to be like, oh, you want me to shut down the schools? Okay, well, here's adoptions. And they wanted to continue their assimilation project and everything through adoption. So they continue to take these children and everything from these families and be able to trade them off to white families. So in attempt and everything to further assimilate them. Now, they kind of used different tactics and everything on taking the families and everything, because these are from loving families. But they're using the tactics of, neglect. And we're talking about the white man standard of neglect. They're talking about removing children from loving homes and everything due to overcrowding. Part of Native American culture and everything is keeping families together. You'll have 2, 3, sometimes 4 families and everything under one roof. But that's not how the government wants it. So they take these children and everything into white families and everything because whiteness is the standard for success, and everything else is judged by that standard. So there was 1 in 4 children, 1 in 4 Native American children and everything taken from their families. And AIM, the American Indian movement and everything, was fighting this, and fuck yeah, go with them. I don't think any change in everything would have came about, without AIM. But AIM also developed a 20-point list to summarize its issues with federal treaties and promises, to which they publicized during their occupation in 1972. 12 points were addressed, but the treaty responsibilities, which the protesters, for the responsibilities, but the protesters and everything believe that the U.S. government had failed to fulfill these 12 that they'd chosen out of the 20. Which is so true. They really didn't do shit.
One thing I want to go to my viewers real quick is how this isn't some far off issue. Like you said, 1928 or whatever you said. Was that the right?
Yeah.
Yeah. 92 years ago. So if you're 93 years old or below,
Oh.
or 90 or older, you were alive when this was the issue. There are humans alive today that were around
Yes.
this issue. And so another thing too is in regards my perspective from black lives, there was a redlining that went on in the 1970s, right? They were legally allowed to deny loans to black people as far as the 1970s, right? So both my parents were alive, and a lot of my viewers were alive. I was born 20 years after that, not even 20 years after that, right? After it was legally allowed to deny people loans based on their race, and so you created these hoods, these ghettos, right? That's why, because they couldn't afford houses, they wouldn't get loans, so they couldn't buy houses. This is not that far off. People think this is just something oh, slavery was in the 1800s. well, the effects of slavery and Jim Crow and this redlining go as far as like 1970s. And the same can be said for Native American issues. Like, you know, the, everything we did in the past, it compounded into the issues we have today. Like, it's not some. I know it's hard to correlate the two, but like the things we did in the past, the atrocities committed against Native American people, have impact today, and they were not that long ago. They were. What was the most recent um, thing you can think of that in regards to Native American issues, and how long ago was it?
Well, uh, I want to be able to go into it and everything, but I also want to be able to reflect on something that kind of like blew my mind in general too. So when we think Native Americans and everything, we think about, us being the first ones here. We were already on this land long before Columbus and the Europeans and everything decided to colonize or anything like that. So therefore, we had our own ways and everything. We had everything established and whatnot. But it's kind of interesting to find out that blacks and Latinos actually ended up getting citizenship and everything in the Americas years and years sooner and everything than the Native Americans did. I don't have the exact dates written down and everything, but I believe it was in the 1860s that blacks and Latinos and everything were given citizenships in the U.S., and it wasn't until the 1940s that Native Americans ended up getting their citizenships in the U.S.
That is
and
so
being
crazy.
able to come off of the reservations, you know?
That is so crazy. That is ridiculous. Like
Yes, it is absolutely
that is
ridiculous.
not that long ago. So if you're 70, 80 years old, you were alive when that was the case. Like that is just so ridiculous. Anyway, continue. I'm sorry. That's just crazy.
Uh, yes, and completely unjustified. It's just like kind of like we were here first, and all y'all are gonna get citizenship before us. What the fuck? But and again and everything, it's not like the blacks and Latinos really had so much of a say with it. And I don't think anybody really had a say with it and everything until they ended up like meeting that white standard, you know. But for Native Americans and everything, it was a tad harder for assimilation and everything apart from the blacks because like we only knew our language, we only knew our ways, we only knew our culture and everything, and we fought for it. We were not willing to give it up and everything whatsoever. So therefore, I'm assuming and everything as to that's why it took longer. But with this and everything, with these boarding schools, I think is probably the harsher reality and everything that leads up to today. Because obviously, our ancestors and everything were the ones who had to deal with the fights and the battles and everything, the trail of tears, the journey and everything to the reservations and everything to what they are today. But you have a lot of elders and everything dealing with a lot of traumas and PTSD and everything today that has to do a lot with these boarding schools. A lot. Between being physically abused and tortured, sexually abused and everything, and you're talking like day in, day out. There was no days off, there was no, there was nobody to run to and everything to save you, there was no getting out of it. And this was for Native Americans and everything all over the U.S., different tribes. And different tribes and everything, they're even dwindling today. Like, they were talking about the suicide rate and everything, compared to Native Americans and other, minorities and everything like that. It doesn't seem that big, but a lot of the suicide rate and everything within Native Americans and everything were the Native Americans who attended these schools, And, okay, let's fast forward to today on how we handle these issues and everything to, people and everything who have been sexually abused, who have been physically abused, who have been, mentally and emotionally abused and everything like that. There is insane traumas that they have to deal with, that insane PTSD and the triggers and everything that you've had to deal with that. And you're talking about generations and generations and generations of this, There is a lot of like unhealed wounds that are affecting generations that have come after. Was it, I believe, like the last school and everything, before going into, the tribes taking over and everything and the Indian Bureau and everything going hand in hand with that. Like that didn't start until like the 1940s, and they started to be able to make change and everything like that. In fact, that I believe there are some schools and everything that are still open today that are nothing like they were, obviously, but you'll have elders and everything who are raising and teaching the younger generation and everything of these and living by them. So as a child and everything, if you're growing up in such an atmosphere and everything, you know, being physically abused in every manner of the word and everything like that, how do you treat your own kids? How do you raise your own kids and everything not knowing anything else? It's not going to be good. I mean, you're going to attempt and everything to have a better and more loving atmosphere and everything like that, but you can't go against and everything that you know, because you don't know anything else. So you'll even hear about children and families and everything today, my age or younger, that are dealing with traumas themselves and everything because they were dealing with the aftermath of their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, you know?
I want to bring this sort of recent, right? Like, we've been talking about, like, you know, the past and all this off season. Like, I don't think people would disagree that the past was bad. They just might not know about the specifics. But let's bring it forward to, like, now. Like, what do we do going forward to, like, alleviate these issues, right? For Black people, I can tell you, like, we have to address some of the issues within our community. We have to continue to be vocal. We have to vote, right? There are a lot of things that, like, me, Black people have done pretty well, and you see it, like.
Oh, you just cut out. Oh, okay, we're good.
You hear me? Okay. We have
oh, now I can. Yeah, you just cut out for a second.
Yeah, we have a Black president. We have, like, Black congressmen. We have representation in a lot. Movies. We have all Black movies, almost, like Black Panther did really well. Black people have a strong representation, far more than we did
very
before.
strong representation. Absolutely, yes.
And so how do we sort of impart that on the Native American community? Like, what do we need to do to get, like, Native Americans sort of to that level of, like, loudness, I guess, political clout, I guess.
You know, and I thought a lot about this and everything, and it's definitely not just one thing, but I'm definitely going to side on your opinion as to making change and everything in regards to the Black Lives Movement. The Indigenous Lives Matter movement and everything like that, I feel needs to be able to go along that as well. You know, we don't have as popular representation and everything as the Black community, because as of right now and everything, you're talking about hip-hop, you're talking about rap, you're talking about certain movies and everything, you're talking about certain celebrities and everything. You know, obviously we just had a Black president and everything. But for Native Americans and everything, I believe it's so much different. And it's not without effort. You'll see a lot of people and everything really trying out there, really trying to speak for their people and everything on social media. You'll see them on YouTube. You'll see them on Instagram and everything, being able to try to keep up our culture, being able to put it out there and everything. Because for us, that's the biggest thing, was the culture for us. And we lost a lot of that, if not for a lot of tribes and everything, all of that. I mean, even for me, I'm Native American. I come from the Chippewa Cree tribe, Rocky Boy in Montana. And I learned a little bit and everything on the few years that I lived on the reservation and everything like that, certain parts of the languages and whatnot, but I, even myself, don't know a lot about my culture. You know, I don't know a lot about where it originated and everything. And in fact, Chippewa Cree and everything isn't even necessarily the name that we use. I can't even think of it right now. But it's the confusion is so much that was taken from us that we're just fighting so hard to get back, that we can't get back and everything from some areas and everything because the government tried so hard and succeeded in so many ways of taking that away from us. You know, and as far as change today, here's one thing. And I had mentioned to you and everything that I had talked to a few people and everything that I know who are still continuing to live on the reservation today or who have recently lived on the reservation and everything. And for example, Fort Belknap Reservation. Now, from a few sources and everything that I heard from and everything, they don't have clean drinking water today. It's 2020 today. Fort Belknap Reservation and everything does not have clean drinking water and everything. And come to find out and everything, you can get H. pylori, commonly known as H, and everything is a type of bacteria that infects the stomach and small bowel and everything that they're getting from the drinking water. This causes peptic ulcer disease, open sores in the lining of the stomach and the upper part of the intestine. or the small intestine and everything. Some symptoms and everything would be belly pain or swelling, loss of appetite, nausea, indigestion, feeling full without eating, vomiting, but without being treated, which, mind you, a lot of these families and everything are living off TANF or Medicaid and everything, and there's some families and everything that don't have access to, the medical help and everything that they need. And being untreated and everything like that, pylori and everything age, if it goes untreated and everything, it can cause internal bleeding. It can become life-threatening. It can create a hole in the stomach that can lead to infection. It creates scar tissue and everything that can block the stomach or intestine, preventing it from emptying. And they have to be able to go to different places and everything for a different source of clean drinking water. And I mean, that you'll have people and everything talking about it who have had like this since like 12 years ago, since they were kids. And it's so common and everything that when you're sitting here talking about like these certain symptoms and everything, or having this intestinal disease and whatnot, it is normal. They talk about it like it's normal. Like it's considered normal because they don't have the opportunity to really get clean drinking water. They have to go to other towns and everything, be able to get bottled water. Now, as somebody who has had to live off of, food stamps and TANF and Medicaid and everything like that and having kids and everything during those times, like, trying to bulk up on everything on drinking water, it's not always that doable.
Yeah, when one of your groceries is water, like, that's a bad thing, right? Like,
yeah, and you can't cook with it either, because if you can't even drink with it, why are you cooking with it?
Yeah, it's so crazy. Like, we think of like most places that don't have clean water like as third world, right? Well, that's here in America, man. Like, Gwent had that as well, right? That was a black community that had that. It was a more than just black community. It was everyone, but it was a majority black community. But we have like reservations that don't have clean drinking water. Dangerous levels of drinking water. So if you guys think this is some distant issue, it's not. It's an issue right now. Why do they not have clean drinking water? We've never put the infrastructure in to get that accomplished, right?
Well, here's the thing. The Bureau of Indian Affairs and everything, from my understanding, are the people who are in control of, the finances and everything for this. The problem with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and everything, and certain councils and whatnot, they're in charge of this money and everything, but it doesn't go to where it's supposed to go. On paper, it says it's going to where it's supposed to go, but in reality, it's really not. And you have these Native Americans and everything dealing with it. Just dealing with it, because they grew up and everything in such a way and everything to where it's just like, what's the point of saying anything? Nobody's going to listen to me. Nothing's going to be done. I could probably sit here until I'm blue in the face and everything, talking about how my life sucks and my living condition and everything is unrealistic, and I'm having a hard time and everything taking care of my children on my land with my family, but nothing gets done. And then therefore they start getting used to it. And we're talking about generations of trauma and everything like that. People who are dealing with trauma and everything like that, they're having enough troubles and everything trying to be able to survive with themselves, let alone going out of their way and everything to make a difference in things that they don't feel that they can make a difference in.
Well, let's do this here. One thing I don't want my viewers to think is I'm blaming anyone. You have to have some level of self-responsibility, right? Like, we as a society have that. So, like, for example, in the black community, like, I'm fully aware that there is black on black crime. It's a thing that exists. I know it's something that needs to be improved. I don't like using it, as a reference for other arguments, but like, we have to admit that like there are things that we can do better. And so, in regards to Native American issues, like the corruption you mentioned, right? Like, there are things that
it's basically
Native Americans have to improve, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of it and everything is just like you're talking about black on black crime. This would probably be like Native American on Native American crime.
I guess.
And right. And I think it's just kind of like a prolonged learned behavior, because it's kind of like selfish and everything in a way. But when I say it's a learned behavior and everything like that, which again, we're going to go back to the boarding schools and everything like that, is you don't really know anything else. So when you don't know anything else and everything, you act on that. So you have hundreds of thousands Native Americans and everything who are treating a lot of the same way and everything, but they start doing it to each other. You know, there are stories of different, and I'm sure there's hundreds and millions more stories and everything, but some of the stories that I know are insanely cruel on the reservation land and everything, on Native Americans, on other Native Americans and everything. I think we're on a very short supply of the idea of sticking together. I think right now, and not just with Native Americans and everything, we're talking about every American is kind of like, look out for number one. Don't worry about them, worry about yourself. So there's not a lot of team effort going on.
No, you're right. Like, we are a very selfish nation, right? So, without question, like we're not a collective society. We're a very individualistic society, right? You're supposed to be able to succeed on your laurels, right? And so when the problem is a collective issue, like when society or the government has put the burden of these atrocities you're talking about, the boarding schools, sexual assault, like these things, when the collective has done that to you, people don't want to hear about it, right? They don't want to give you the excuse like, oh, just pull your bootstraps up and succeed anyway. And it works sometimes, but you're
It
starting at a
doesn't,
pretty big
yeah,
disadvantage, right? It doesn't address the issue, right?
it doesn't, it doesn't work out. It's not that simple. I mean, this kind of goes with one of the conversations and everything that I had yesterday with, a few friends and family members and everything is that, they try to say is just like, well, a lot of this happened, so many years ago. It happened like 100 years ago and everything. It's 2020 and everything. There's so many opportunities out there. Just get off your ass and do something about it. Don't sit there and complain and everything. Do something about it. Well, here's the thing, is that on reservations and everything, they're very and extremely underfunded. And within underfunding and everything, there's underfunded schools. And with underfunded schools and everything, there's little to no education. So you're talking about these opportunities and all these things and everything that they would be able to do to be able to make change. Well, if you're not aware of them or be able to have access to them, then what the fuck?
Well,
it's not going to happen with magic.
Here's an analogy for you guys, right? There's a really brilliant video on YouTube or Facebook about this, but like, imagine you're starting a race, right? Every baby is starting a race, and then you're a kid, you're able to walk. So take one step forward if getting to school was easy for you, if it was free and easy, right? Take one step forward if you had school supplies, right? Take one step forward if you had clean drinking water. Take one step forward if you had heat in your house. Take one step forward if you could afford food, you weren't hungry. Take one step forward if you had a parent that could stay home, right? Sure, the race is a long race and anyone can succeed, but like when you look where some people are in this race, they're so far back. They don't have any of these opportunities that would just be one step. But you add them all together and it's like a large distance, right? Like you have to level that playing field a little bit, and that's whether that's government funding, whether that's a revamping of the tribal law. I don't know what that looks like. I'm not a tribal expert, but we have to recognize that the issues are real, and they are keeping people in poverty, right? Like this is not imaginary, and you can't just like come out of it. It's just not how it works, right? Like do better.
Exactly.
Awesome. How? Help me, So yeah.
Well,
what do we do going forward?
There's a lot of different places and everything who are trying to be able to promote change and trying to be able to get treatment and everything for people who need it. I believe I had it written down somewhere and everything. Sorry.
All good. Your face is like half cut off.
I know. I mean, I'm just sitting here looking at it. I was just like, no, I had it written down, and I was so excited and everything about this. I'm so in my zone. But there are different corporations and everything. There are different people and everything who are trying to be able to make a change, who are aware of these issues and everything. There's treatment plans and everything for people, let's say, and everything who are suffering from the PTSD and everything from boarding schools, who are suffering from PTSD and everything, or, different traumas and everything that they have to deal with at home. Now, the problem with that, and in some of these places and everything, you're able to go in for free, you know. You're able to go in and everything and be like, I have such and such and this going on and everything, and they're able to go in. Others, you know, you have to be able to not only qualify, but you have to be able to pay. You have to be able to pay in some way. But even with that, even with having the opportunities and everything like that, we're talking about people dealing with trauma. And I know it's kind of a thing when somebody thinks about a Native American and everything. What do they usually think of? They think about like alcoholics and, you know, people with gambling problems and, you know, things like that and everything. But nobody actually sits there and thinks about, okay, why are they alcoholics? Why do you think that they have these addiction issues? You know, they're trying to be able to mask and numb pain. But the thing about these addictions and everything is that that's just what they are. They're addictions. And not everybody who has an addiction and everything is looking for treatment because they found what they think works. So you're talking about these Native American families and everything who turn to alcohol to be able to numb this trauma and everything like that, but are still trying to raise kids. Now we're talking about alcoholics and everything raising children. You and I both know that that's not always the best turnout.
Not a formula for success, right?
No, definitely not. And these kids and everything have to be able to deal with it. Well, they grow up in this atmosphere and everything, and it's kind of like a monkey see, monkey do situation. Because you have these people and everything who are trying to heal from their traumas and everything with alcohol, but creating more trauma for people who need that to be able to heal from their traumas, and it goes on and on and on. Now, granted, just like you said and everything, there has to be change. You have to be able to accept what is and everything and be able to move forward and everything looking for change. But change doesn't come without understanding. You know, you have to be able to understand why these people are the way they are and why things are the way they are. And once you have an understanding of that, you'll have a better idea of what it takes to change.
Yeah, go ahead and find your sources, by the way. One thing I do want to like talk to my viewers about is like in 2020, they're just now changing the name of the Redskins, right? The Washington Redskins. Like, if you think these issues are distant, they're not. Like, they're happening today. And whether that's a big issue or not, that can be debated, right? We're not here to debate that specifically. But like, just remember, like, it's a current issue. When you see people downtown Great Falls, there's almost always this guy that's a drunk native guy, right? And your first thought is like, oh man, typical. Like, if that's something that crosses your mind, like, be part of the solution, right? Like, learn why these things are happening, why this is like, why you think that way, why it's stereotypical, right? Because there's issues, and we have to address those issues. And obviously, there's some self-ownership there. Like, no one's making him drink, but we have to address the parts of society and the parts of the government and just us as humans that's enabling a system to continually have people that are falling to addiction or impoverished in this way. Like, I'm 100% certain that if you told someone, hey, you have two choices here. You can live this life that's poverty, or you can do better for yourself. They almost always choose option B, right? Like, people do want to
because it's
succeed.
easier.
So
Yeah.
it's not that people don't want to succeed. So do you have those sources like that you're?
Actually, I've been writing in 2 different books and everything on this as far as getting my resources, and I do not have it here.
That's okay.
It is actually at my class somewhere else.
That's okay. I was gonna go over like what are some actual places people can go to, but like if you get a chance, like do some research on the subject, guys.
I do want to be able to do that, yeah, so
Yeah.
people can actually be more aware.
Yeah, I want to raise actual awareness of this, right? Because it's not something you see. Like I said, the voice to me, my personal opinion is the voice of Native Americans is very quiet in society right now. We had the whole pipeline situation before. That got some.
And wasn't that incredible? I thought that was absolutely incredible. Like, they really stepped up with that. They were not willing to give up. If you saw some of the, the news reviews and everything on that, there were people taking rubber bullets, man. They were trying to get gassed out and everything like that, and they were not giving up, and rightfully so. I'm very proud of that aspect.
They were in the cold. They were like,
Yeah.
crazy situation. And again, I don't whether you believe or whether you agree with that or not. That's not really what I'm getting into. I'm just sort of stating like the voice of Native Americans, right? I'm not saying like pipelines are bad and whatever. I'm saying that like as the issues that affect Native Americans, we tend to not like see them nationally. Like I said, a lot of missing indigenous people go missing all the time. And like I know Trump just addressed this in a executive order or something, but like it barely makes the news, you know. So you have to understand like there are people who are suffering right now, and there's a lot we can do for them. So, and that starts with voting, right? Get educated on the issue, and then go out and vote. You know, so that's where I would leave my listeners. Please use your civic duty to vote, to understand the issue. Our education system is flawed. Don't let that be the end of it. Continue your education afterwards. Like do your
Absolutely.
research, right? Um,
Absolutely.
it's a big deal. So, is there anything you want to like leave the listeners? You know, is there any sort of information you want to impart on them? Any personal take on this, Kelsey?
There's absolutely a saying that I live by that I definitely press on to my kids. It's knowledge is power. Honest to God, knowledge is power. Educate yourself in everything the best that you can. Even if you're in a school and everything that happens to be underfunded or you're not provided the kind of education and everything you feel you deserve, it's 2020, guys. You can go on YouTube, you can go on Google, you can be able to educate yourself on the things that you're passionate about. And the more you know, the more you're aware of, the more you're able to make a difference, for sure.
So, guys, real fast, I wanted to let you know like this podcast was pretty somber, I believe, right? Not that it wasn't worth it, but like this won't be, you know, the only kind of podcast going forward. We're already do some fun stuff, but I really just felt like this was something that had to be said, right? And I know Kelsey
Yes,
has a
yes.
loud voice, like we have to get this out, right? And so just like take your time, do some research, please. From the bottom of my heart, I want people to understand like racism at its core, not just the superficial stuff like the N word, people calling bad names. Like really take time to understand like systemic racism and those kind of things, right? Because they're a big deal, and I don't even know why sometimes we talk about it like we do. People pretend it doesn't exist because it does exist. So take some time to learn about that, guys. We're gonna cut the podcast here. Thank you for joining me, Kelsey. I really appreciate it, and I'm
Absolutely.
happy to have
Thanks
me.
for the opportunity.
Yeah, do you plan on being on future episodes? You want to do some more podcasts? Get off your back.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I'm so down.
If you guys want to reach out to Kelsey, we do have the Lip Service Podcast group. You can also comment on the video. We will do our best to respond. So thank you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye.